Hello Internet. She starts. I'm Jessie Fox and welcome to another episode of the Fox News. Behind the camera, we have Enzo Cardoza, and today I have two inspiring digital rights activists that have been making the news on and off for different reasons for the last couple of years now, June and Rache. Welcome to the show, ladies. Thank you, Jessie, June replies. It was quite a drive getting down here, Rache adds. You could almost say it took 2 months. Oh yes, but I had to have you come down here in person, even if it happens to be a longer drive than you did for your trip to DC earlier this year to speak in front of Congress. Just because, as I told you when I reached out to you, the food here is amazing, or at the very least beats DC. How have you liked it so far? Oh, we have eaten very well since we've gotten here, Rache admits, looking at June and remembering their lunch before coming into the studio. Thanks to some of your recommendations. I really appreciate it. I am really amazed by the Charleston food scene already. Where'd you go? Jessie asks, resting her chin on her folded hands. The Glass Onion. We had watched the movie on a Redbox and chill night recently, so it seemed like fate, June replies. After you get done here, go out and explore, try new dishes and new restaurants before you leave. And be sure to leave room for a sweetgrass basket of beignets from the Cakewalk Bakery for dessert. Trust me, you won't regret it. We'll be sure to. I love a good beignet, Rache confesses with a big smile of anticipation. So, I have to say your MNN interview was one of the best moments of television I've seen in the last year. Hands down. I just had to have you on my show to give you the opportunity to tell me and tell the world how you really feel about the world's corporate owners dunking on maybe companies like Goober and Inside, and how they symbolize the increasingly monopolized world in which we live, in which the consolidation of corporate power comes at the cost of workers and consumers alike. Jessie starts, pausing to allow her guests to present their thoughts. We believe that companies like Goober and Inside have too much power, and it's not just an issue of monopoly anymore, but monopsony as well, and sometimes both at once, Rache adds. Yes, you have absolutely hit that nail on the head, June replies. They're buying out the competition and consolidating power at the cost of their workers and their consumers alike. Rache adds, and it's not just about Goober and Inside, it's about all of the major companies that are controlling the market. They're making it harder for small businesses to succeed, and for customers to have a choice in choosing a company that actually reflects their beliefs about how these corporate ecosystems should work. Jessie nods in agreement. It's important to have people to be aware of the power of these companies and the impact that they have on our society. But that can only be a first step. We have to go somewhere from there. But to know where to go, we have to have an appropriate understanding of what the problems are. So thank you for bringing attention to this issue in all of your appearances on the sterile corporate cable news networks. If you don't mind, we actually have a question for you, Jessie, June asks. Oh, well, this doesn't happen very often, Jessie says with a delighted grin. Rache picks up where June left off. We're actually curious as an OTuber how you feel about the proliferation of OWN, the Oracle World News Service, as its own cable channel. Well, I think there's a lot of good and a lot of bad that comes from that decision. For one, Oracle being one of the largest purveyors of this country's data in so many different ways. I mean, being the service which hosts the show that we're on right now, but you know them also owning something in the brick and mortar space of cable television, having something that is kind of, you know, more de facto thought of as mainstream because it shows up on television instead of within an app or on a website primarily. And they've made some really interesting decisions in who they have hired for positions there, because they're mainly just hiring out of their own OTube talent. And while these people are good at making entertaining content, this is certainly what vaulted them to fame on the OTube platform. It's not necessarily that they are good journalists, although, you know, compared to some of these people who just feel like stuffed suits who were paid to say what their corporate masters asked them to, it is a refreshing difference. Even if it is sometimes very problematic. Jessie seems a little flustered by the question, but also a bit concerned. That is an interesting and nuanced take, June responds quickly. Rache nods, and I guess that's why so many people tune into your show. Thank you. Thank you. Well, we aren't quite popular enough yet to get an offer to go on OWN, but, you know, if I did get one I certainly would go despite my feelings, and I've talked about the quote-unquote mainstream news, the corporatist news, that we see on our cable infrastructure. It would just not make sense for me not to go to a place where I would have a larger platform and be able to speak to a larger group of people. I mean, I'm sure that you have felt this as well as you were doing your cable news tours, but there isn't really a left-wing or even a very progressive voice on the cable news. There's just TNN, MNN, and then OWN is kind of all over the place depending on who's doing the show. I'd like to bring this back through to the way that all of this is made possible by there only being really 2 or 3 distinct options for getting the news that are considered to be quote-unquote mainstream, June says, and Jessie nods. By all means, go ahead. If that ecosystem was not as consolidated, June starts, if there were channels from all over the spectrum that could compete within that, then it would be a much healthier and perhaps a much truthful ecosystem all around because there would be a lot more perspectives that one would have to consider and compete with for airtime. And this all ties in very well with, a lot of the large companies in this country, Rache ads. They just have too much control over our lives. Because what happens is they start out, they take dominance, they establish a monopoly in a single area like Oracle did in search, or Social Link did with social media. They use it to make massive amounts of money, and then they start buying every upstart that has a good idea, hoping that some of those ideas will be able to expand their empire and their control over our daily lives and our data, and sometimes, and if they buy enough of these quite often, some of them will pay off to increasingly cement their position in being present in all parts of our lives. Jessie nods vigorously, adding, but this is just kind of the same power that all large monopolies and essentially cartels have. They dictate prices, they suppress their competition, and they ultimately harm both their consumers, their workers, and other small businesses which might offer an alternative to their abusive practices, June adds. And that's why we're calling for stronger anti-monopoly laws and regulations. We need to prevent these companies from gaining too much power. If I understand it correctly, another big part of your message is about data protection. And I've heard you talk a lot about, also, how small businesses are affected by this as well, which isn't necessarily something that I always hear in there. Usually when I hear people talking about small businesses, it feels like they're talking about them cynically. They're saying, oh, this is going to help small businesses, when in fact it only helps the monopolies grow stronger. It's kind of like a tongue-in-cheek way of laundering your efforts politically, but you actually seem to be talking about small businesses, and I believe that is because of, let me see. Jessie shuffles through a few papers in front of her. This is the Blue Ridge Communette? Yes, June replies. Yes, that's what we're calling our ISP, where we're hoping that we can unite a large part of the Blue Ridge Mountains in Virginia, through a singular network. And this is one of the areas that has not been updated in infrastructure because there is a low population density around the mountains. And because of this, the only real option for a data connection that people have is Americans Online. And this is largely because being one of the oldest players in the ISP market and having consolidated control over certain parts of America that have never been challenged since the company was established. There's a lot of little places in America like the Blue Ridge Mountains, where they have absolute dominance, while providing no real updates or incentives to their service. We're getting the same type of service that we got 10 years ago when around us we're seeing fiber internet, we're seeing broadband, we're seeing all of these high-speed connections all around our state. And yet, we are still working on aging infrastructure. And that's why we came together to, try to first clear the very low bar that had been set by our local internet service provider in terms of data quality, but also we wanted to go ahead and make sure that our customers' data was local, encrypted and very much safe, not being stored and sold, and that additionally we could provide a price that would be low enough that anyone within the community, literally anyone within the community, should be able to afford it. And these are just not promises that these major internet service provider monopolies are willing to make because they can afford to let 10 or 20% of America not be able to afford an internet connection. Because they are fleecing the other 80% of us enough that it makes up for it. But if we provide internet at an actual affordable price, if we try to get that number to 100%, then we can provide a better service to everyone, and that's going to improve people's lives all across this country. Rache nods, adding, and the reason why is that our daily lives, whether we want to admit this or not, our opportunities at work, our opportunities socially, our opportunities to meet up with people and expand our social horizons. All of these things come from the internet largely. There are very few, especially now while we're still in the midst of a pandemic that I hope we can come out of soon. It looks like we're starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. But I've heard so many people say that over the last, it's almost been 2 years, year and a half, close to 2 years now. But I think we are actually getting there. Finally, I don't want to jinx it by saying this on the show, but maybe some of those watering holes can come back, maybe there will be a way to really connect with our communities again. But in lieu of that, That is what we wanted to do. We wanted to provide everyone access to the broader internet so they have all of the advantages that everyone else who has an internet connection does. We don't want to leave people behind. That is a very important part of the story. But in addition to that, there is also the element of the fact that our communities kind of need rebuilding. And we think that the COMM UnityNet can be a good way of accomplishing this. Because in addition to providing data services, we also have a local, geo-locked service that provides a local community intranet, which becomes a sort of highly localized digital watering hole. That, of course, allows you to keep socially distanced while meeting people who are within your social proximity. Jessie waves her hands as if she were calling for a timeout. Okay, you just used a couple of words that either I or this audience are probably not familiar with, and I don't really want to admit which. But you said intranet, and you said geo-lock, so can you explain what those things mean? To someone who isn't working in the internet service provider field? Well, honestly, this isn't something that is usually addressed by internet service providers. But so what an intranet is, it's a kind of like a pocket internet. You can think of it that way. June pauses and collects her thoughts, as a lot of this was new to her as well. It is a connection between a somewhat exclusive set of computers. In this case, all of the computers on our network are able to communicate with each other within the intranet. And that intranet is not connected directly to the larger global internet. It is isolated from that. This also means that all of that data is being transmitted exclusively through our network, so no one ever has to pay any data for that connection. Really. You're just transmitting data within the community. It's never going anywhere larger, and with distributed hosting, within the intranet, you also get the opportunity to have full control of your data because it never really leaves your device. Other people can view it by connecting to your device, connecting to things that are stored on your device through the intranet, but if you ever choose to say delete those items or remove them for any reason, then they will become inaccessible on the intranet. It's not being stored or locked anywhere necessarily, although it can be shared and downloaded if you choose to. But we are all about giving you the rights to your data. So if you want to put something up to be viewed only, not to be screenshot, things like that, we can accomplish that through the internet in a way that just wouldn't necessarily be as possible if these things were shared on the internet at large. And you asked about it being geo-locked, Rache adds, picking up on the second question, and I think that this is personally kind of important. It does create some issues, especially if your data is being stored on a mobile device. Let's say you leave town, all of your data will become inaccessible to the intranet because you are now outside of the geographical bounds of the intranet, and therefore you are no longer connected to it, so your data disappears along with you. So if you ever move out of the community, then you don't have to worry about taking that data down, it will leave with you or as soon as you no longer maintain it. But it also means that people from the outside world, people who are not geographically located within our network within the geographical bounds of where we put our repeaters, they will be unable to connect to this. Now we may create an outside tunnel which you can access this from the outside, but that actually does create a bit of a security risk that we might just avoid entirely by just not making that possible. So it's a way to keep in touch with the people around you while you're in town. And everything that you see on the internet was put there by someone who lives near you, someone whom you could presumably drive to and have a conversation with if you wanted to, instead of it being so global as to almost feel anonymous. I see that as a very interesting idea, Jessie says, looking both pensive and excited. And I can see how people might find that especially appealing in the place that we are right now during the pandemic. I don't think an idea like that necessarily would have had the same shine in 2019. People would have said, I can access millions of people on social link. Why would I want to limit my exposure to the internet by communicating with people that are only within, maybe 5 or 10 or 20 miles from me? Exactly, Rache exclaims, glad to meet someone who got it. It's just a completely different way of looking at what our online experience can be, June adds. And this is not to say that you won't have access to the internet. Of course you will. That's what your data connection is for. But this will give you an alternative that can maybe keep you mindful of your neighbors and the people who live closest to you, your direct community, in a way that there really just isn't an alternative for, and this is something that communities will have to design for themselves in the way that it works can be decided on a community-to-community basis. I mean, really what we're trying to design here and what is starting to work, at least if we can make it through the lawsuit process. If we can do that, then perhaps we have established a repeatable model that can be used across the country. And I think in some ways that is what scares them, but again, can't really get into the lawsuit very much. Jessie frowns a bit. I was going to ask about the lawsuit. It seems that Americans Online has taken issue with you starting up an ISP in their territory. Yes, and without getting into the details, Rache takes a sip of water and swallows hard before continuing, hoping to clear her throat. Of the case too much. A lot of the things, just my personal non-lawyer impression, but a lot of the things that they're trying to claim that we're doing and trying to claim are illegal, they don't seem to be based on much evidence at all. But that's for the court to decide. I am not a lawyer. I'm not qualified to make such observations, but they also seem incredibly anti-competitive. It seems like by the nature of a company, starting a business, that a lot of these things that they say we are supposedly doing wrong, simply just amount to us existing, and I find it hard to believe. No, that's wrong. I don't actually find it hard to believe that our laws could be written in such an anti-competitive way. But I hope that they aren't. And well, I guess we'll find out. Yeah, well, I guess we'll have to have you on after that court case is over, Jessie replies, so we can hear all the spicy dish. You can just spill the tea, sip the wine, hang out here and tell me all about how it went, and I want you to know that myself and I really assume much of my audience is rooting for you in this one. We really want to see you succeed, Jessie says, looking down at a video panel built into her desk. And actually looking over at the chat right now. They really want you to succeed as well, she adds with a soft laugh. Thank you, Jessie, and thank you, chat, for that, June replies graciously with a kind smile. Is there anything that you've really wanted to talk more about that you don't get asked by the mainstream media? Jessie asks. Oh God, June says, almost spitting her water on the table. There's so much actually. You brought up Goober before though, and there is one case that I really wish more people in the media were talking about. We got to talk a little bit about this on OWN recently, but it's not a new story. It was in our speech on January 4th as well. It's one of the things that I'm always hoping I'll get asked, but a lot of times we talk about the idea of dreams being leaked as a hypothetical, but it's not a hypothetical, is it? I mean, it wasn't a hypothetical for Jonathan Biggs, was it? You know, it's, I have to say, Rache says, picking up the conversation. I didn't really want to bring up Hypnos recently because their recent changes to their data policies and their company's practices. If they really follow these things up to the letter, then they're leading the way, they really are, in what we should be doing to protect our data. And I have to say, you know, it's better late than never, but this is how it should have been to begin with. And it is so good. So good to have this issue taken care of here in 2021. Because can you imagine what 2022 and the midterms would look like if this hadn't been fixed? I mean, just think about it. We would be seeing politicians. Dirty dreams leaked, there would be sex dream scandals. All through the news cycle. Genuinely good candidates who'd be shamed out of running, or just even if the leaks didn't go public, they could be blackmailed with the threat of them going public. I'm not saying necessarily that a company like Hypnos would do this, but if their data was not secure, they would be a very vulnerable target for the types of interests and the types of political groups that would resort to hacking their servers to dig up an unsightly dream. And the fact that it seems as though, and this is alleged, it seems that the only person who benefited, the only organization that benefited from leaking the dreams of Jonathan Biggs was Goober, because that was able to shame him out of the unionization rally that he was planning, and without his leadership. I mean, they did still hold the vote, but they didn't make it. They might have been able to make it with Jonathan Biggs, we don't know. And we don't know because his dreams were leaked before we could find out. June swallows another sip of water and clears her throat with a light cough into her arm. And that is exactly the kind of terrifying future that we were warning people about even late in 2020 when we were talking about Morpheus technologies. And it's not that it feels vindicating to have an example of how this worked. It's not that I wanted to brag about this to say I told you so. But it's good to be on the other side of the issue now, I guess. To know that that's less likely to happen in the future now. And I'm calling on all the other big tech companies out there to follow similar protocols in protecting their customers' data and not selling it wholesale, even though this is some of their business models entirely. They're going to have to find a new way to make money because increasingly the people will not stand for this. And it's not just about technology, Rache picks up. It's about building a community that cares. And that is invested in protecting their own data and privacy. We're trying to create a model that can be replicated, that puts the needs of the community first, instead of just maximizing profits for a few big corporations. It's clear that both of you are deeply committed to creating a more just and equitable internet for all, Jessie says as the cameraman starts signaling to draw the interview to a close. It's inspiring to myself and to everyone watching. I'm sure to see the work that you're doing. And I hope that it serves as a model for others to follow. But with all of that being said, this has been a long one, and thank you, everyone in the audience, for sticking around until the end. Ladies, do you have anything else you would like to say before we end the show? June sits back in her chair as Rache goes into PR mode. Well, actually, I've been writing a book recently. It is nearly done. Maybe we can talk about this the next time I'm on your show, but it's about our history and activism and how we got to where we are now. In fact, it's about what brought us to the Capitol back in January, how we got there. And we weren't all over the news back then. It's a story that I think a lot of people don't know. And I'm happy to be able to tell it. That sounds great. We'll be looking forward to it, and I look forward to being able to have both of you again on my show in the future. After you kick AOL's ass in court. So, best of luck to both of you.